Have you ever felt like you're stuck in a relationship that's part romance, part emotional torture? One minute you're wrapped up in connection, laughing, sharing, maybe even dreaming about the future, and then suddenly out of nowhere they pull away. The texts slow down, the warmth disappears. You're left wondering what you did wrong, even though you know deep down you were just being yourself. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone and you're not crazy. You're likely caught in what I call the anxious avoidant death trap, a toxic cycle of affection and withdrawal that leaves you emotionally drained and constantly second-guessing your worth. Hi, I'm Jim Rohn, and I help people break free from emotionally lopsided relationships and rebuild their sense of self in the process. Today's video is going to dive deep into the psychological push-pull dynamic between anxious and avoidant attachment styles. This is the pattern where one person craves closeness and the other gets overwhelmed and retreats. And the cruel part, the more one reaches for connection, the more the other pulls away. It's an emotional loop that feels powerful, intense, and even addictive. But it's not love. It's wounding trying to connect with wounding. In this video, we're going to unpack why this happens, where it comes from, and, most importantly, how you can step out of it. You'll learn how childhood experiences shape these attachment styles, how your body and nervous system respond to emotional triggers in ways you might not even be aware of, and how to stop over-functioning in relationships that leave you feeling emotionally abandoned. This is about more than just understanding the cycle, it's about breaking it. So you can finally stop chasing people who can't meet you and start choosing relationships where emotional safety and consistency are the norm, not the exception. If you've been walking on eggshells, overthinking every message and losing yourself in the hope that someone will finally show up for you, this is your wake-up call. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what we uncover today could shift how you see yourself, your needs, and your relationships forever. And if this speaks to something real in your life, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. I share grounded, practical tools every week to help you stop repeating unhealthy dynamics and start building secure, self-respecting love. You're not too much. You're not too needy. You just haven't been met with the kind of presence and partnership you truly deserve. Let's get into it. Let's start by breaking down what the anxious avoidance cycle really looks like, because if you're stuck in it, you might feel like you're constantly spinning in circles, wondering what's wrong with you or the relationship. The best way I can describe it is like being on an emotional roller coaster. There are moments when it feels absolutely amazing, like you're finally connecting on a deep level. There's closeness, affection, maybe even a feeling of safety and excitement. You think, this is it, we're finally getting somewhere. But then almost without warning, things shift. The energy changes, your partner pulls away. They become distant, distracted, or cold. And suddenly you're back to questioning everything. This pattern is so confusing because those highs, the moments of closeness, are real, and they can feel intoxicating. But when those moments are followed by sudden withdrawal, it creates instability that keeps you stuck. You become emotionally hooked, not just by the connection, but by the fear of losing it. That fear can be incredibly strong, especially if you lean more anxious in your attachment style. You may start clinging, texting more often, trying to reconnect, doing everything you can to bring the warmth back. But the more you reach, the more the avoidant partner tends to retreat. This is where the cycle takes hold. The anxious partner becomes preoccupied with the relationship, trying to fix the disconnection, trying to figure out what they did wrong. They may feel panicked, rejected, or abandoned. Meanwhile, the avoidant partner starts to feel overwhelmed. The closeness that once felt good now feels like pressure. They begin to disconnect emotionally, either by going quiet, changing the subject, or physically pulling away. And the more they pull away, the more the anxious partner tries to close the gap. Round and round it goes. What makes this cycle so hard to escape is that both people are being driven by unconscious fears. The anxious partner fears abandonment and craves reassurance. The avoidant partner fears being engulfed or losing their sense of self. These fears feed off each other, creating a dynamic where neither person feels truly safe. Yet ironically, both are seeking the same thing: connection. They just have different ways of protecting themselves from the pain of vulnerability. This dynamic isn't anyone's fault. It's not about one person being the villain and the other being the victim. It's about recognizing that this pattern is learned behavior, usually rooted in early attachment experiences. If you grew up with caregivers who were inconsistent or emotionally unavailable, this cycle may feel strangely familiar. That's why it can feel so intense and hard to leave. It taps into old wounds and deep needs. But the good news is, this cycle can be broken. And the first step is awareness. Once you can name the pattern, you can begin to shift your role in it. You don't have to keep playing the same part just because it's what you've always known. To really understand how this anxious avoidance cycle forms and why it can feel so hard to break, we have to look at where it all begins: your attachment style. Most of the time, these patterns don't come out of nowhere. They're shaped by early life experiences, usually in childhood, through the way your emotional needs were met or not met by your caregivers. These experiences leave lasting imprints that shape how you relate to closeness, connection, and emotional safety in your adult relationships. For people with an anxious attachment style, the root of the cycle often lies in inconsistent caregiving. Maybe you had a parent who sometimes gave you love and attention, but only when you behaved a certain way or only when they were in a good mood. You never knew when the love would be there and when it wouldn't. So over time, your nervous system learned to scan constantly for signs of disconnection. You may have learned to cling to prove your worth or to try harder when someone started pulling away. Because deep down, love never felt secure. It felt like something that could disappear at any moment. So now, when your partner withdraws, that old fear gets triggered. Your instinct is to fix it, to move closer, to get reassurance fast, because losing love feels like a threat to your emotional survival. On the flip side, if you're more avoidantly attached, the story is different, but just as powerful. Often people with avoidant attachment grew up in environments where emotional expression wasn't safe or welcomed. Maybe your caregivers were emotionally distant, dismissive, or only valued your independence. Maybe being vulnerable led to being criticized, ignored, or made to feel weak. So you learned early on, don't rely on others, don't show too much, don't get too close. As an adult, intimacy may feel good at first, but as soon as someone wants more closeness, your system flares up. It says, this is dangerous. You might lose yourself, you might get hurt, so you pull back. Not because you don't care, but because closeness feels threatening in a way that's hard to explain. This is what makes the anxious avoidance cycle so compelling and yet so painful. Both people are acting out deeply ingrained patterns that feel familiar. The anxious person is often drawn to the avoidant because it mirrors the push-pull they experienced with a parent: moments of closeness, followed by emotional distance. And the avoidant feels comfortable around the anxious person because it confirms their belief that closeness is overwhelming and that people will always need more than they can give. It's a subconscious match that plays out again and again until one or both people become conscious of it. Understanding the origin of this cycle is key to changing it. Once you see how your past shaped your current reactions, you can start to slow down and respond differently. It's not about blaming your parents or partners, it's about breaking the chain. You don't have to stay stuck in patterns that were written for you. You get to rewrite the script. One of the most important things you can do if you want to break free from the anxious-avoidant dynamic is to learn how to recognize the signs. Awareness gives you choice. If you can't see the pattern, you can't interrupt it. And this particular cycle is subtle, confusing, and emotionally intense. It often feels like a connection that should work. There's chemistry, attraction, even a sense of fate. But the emotional experience tells a different story. It's unstable, it's hot and cold, and you're never quite sure where you stand. The most obvious sign of this dynamic is the fluctuation in affection and attention. You'll notice one partner is almost always trying to move the relationship forward. They want closeness, reassurance, deeper conversations, regular contact. This is often the anxious partner. Meanwhile, the avoidant partner often starts strong but pulls back once the intimacy deepens. They need space after closeness. Maybe after a great weekend together, they suddenly get busy, become emotionally distant, or stop initiating. This shift leaves the anxious partner scrambling to reconnect, often blaming themselves or trying harder to fix things. That back and forth intensity followed by distance is a key marker of this cycle. Over time, the emotional ups and downs become more than just frustrating. They become exhausting. It starts to resemble a trauma bond. What do I mean by that? I mean that the emotional highs feel euphoric and the lows feel devastating. When things are good, you feel deeply connected, like everything finally makes sense. But when the withdrawal happens, it hits hard. You might feel rejected, abandoned, or even panicked. For the anxious partner, that fear of losing the connection drives behavior that's more intense, more texts, more pressure, more need. But instead of helping, this usually causes the avoidant partner to retreat even more. Now the avoidant isn't trying to hurt anyone. They're usually trying to manage their own internal discomfort. For them, vulnerability feels dangerous. Getting close might trigger old wounds about not feeling safe when emotionally exposed. So their instinct is to shut down, create distance, or even pick fights to re-establish emotional space. They don't say "I'm afraid of being too close," but their behavior communicates it clearly. They might delay replying, become vague about future plans, or simply disappear for a few days. The anxious partner interprets this as abandonment. They push harder, and the cycle continues. The thing is, both partners are operating from a place of fear. One fears abandonment, the other fears engulfment. But because neither person is fully aware of their own patterns or lacks the tools to communicate openly, they act in ways that confirm each other's worst beliefs. The anxious partner believes they're too much. The avoidant partner believes closeness leads to losing themselves. It's painful, and over time it starts to erode trust, self-worth, and emotional safety. Recognizing these signs doesn't mean you're doomed. It means you're waking up. The next step is learning how to step out of the pattern with awareness, boundaries, and secure energy, whether the relationship continues or not. And that's where real change begins. So, how do you actually break the anxious avoidance cycle once you've recognized it? That's the big question. And the answer starts with something very simple but not always easy: self-awareness. You have to take an honest look at how you contribute to the dynamic. Not in a self-critical way, but in a clear, compassionate way. If you're someone who tends to feel anxious in relationships, you may notice that you over-communicate when things feel uncertain. You might send multiple texts, over-analyze their words, or become emotionally flooded when there's distance. On the other side, if you lean more avoidant, you might notice you pull away when someone gets too close. Maybe you downplay your feelings, dodge conversations about commitment, or get irritated when things become emotionally intense. This isn't about blame. It's about naming behaviors that keep the cycle going. And once you see those patterns, the next step is to trace where they come from. Most of the time, these aren't random reactions. They're old familiar strategies rooted in childhood. If you're anxious, maybe you grew up with caregivers who gave love inconsistently, present one day, distant the next. You learned to cling to please to earn love through effort. If you're avoidant, maybe your emotional needs were dismissed. Maybe you had to grow up fast, suppress your feelings, or rely only on yourself. That creates a deep discomfort with intimacy, even when part of you craves it. From there, what really helps is transparent communication. If you're in a relationship and you recognize this cycle is happening, speak to it. Say something like, "I've noticed we have this pattern. I get close, and then there's a pullback. Do you notice that too?" The goal here isn't to accuse or fix. It's to get on the same page to see if your partner is willing to work through it with you. That willingness is crucial. Because if only one of you is trying to change, it becomes an uphill climb. Both people need to take ownership of their part in the pattern. And once that door is open, you each have a role to play. If you're the anxious one, the real work lies in learning to self-soothe. That means building your emotional resilience, reminding yourself that you're okay even when your partner is distant. It might mean giving them space without panicking or reaching out to supportive friends instead of relying only on your partner. It's about reducing the emotional weight you put on the relationship so you're not driven by fear. If you're the avoidant, the work is often harder because it involves doing the exact thing your system resists most: expressing emotions. But this is essential. Expression is the antidote to avoidance. That doesn't mean you have to share everything all at once. It can start small, like saying, "I'm feeling overwhelmed and need a little time to myself." The key is to be honest without disappearing. Let your partner into your experience even if it feels uncomfortable. And finally, you build trust, not just with each other, but within yourselves. Anxious partners begin to trust the relationship's stability. Avoidant partners learn to trust that vulnerability won't lead to being smothered or judged. Bit by bit, that trust creates a secure foundation. And that's when real intimacy begins. Not the roller coaster kind, but the grounded, steady kind that actually lasts. Now here's something you really need to understand. Breaking the anxious avoidant cycle isn't something one person can do alone. That's a tough truth, but it's an important one. Relationships are systems, and systems operate based on the input of both people. If only one person is trying to create change while the other keeps repeating old patterns, avoiding shutting down or clinging, it's like trying to row a boat in a circle. You might make some progress in your own emotional growth, but the relationship itself won't move forward. You'll feel stuck. You'll feel like you're always compensating for what the other person won't face. That gets exhausting fast. So, mutual effort, real consistent commitment from both partners is non-negotiable. This isn't about demanding perfection or emotional fluency from your partner overnight. It's about both people saying, "Yes, I see this. Yes, I'm willing to work on it. And yes, I care enough about this relationship to change how I show up." If that's not happening, then it might be time to ask some hard questions about whether this relationship is truly healthy or just familiar. Because familiarity, especially if it's based on past wounds, can feel like love, but it's not the same thing. When both people do commit to the work, something powerful starts to happen. The anxious partner begins to relax. Why? Because they're no longer the only one holding the emotional weight of the relationship. And the avoidant partner surprisingly begins to soften. Why? Because they start to feel safe. Safe to express themselves, safe to lean in, safe to trust. That's what mutual effort creates emotional safety. And emotional safety is the foundation of secure attachment. Working through these patterns together actually becomes a healing process. You're not just managing conflict or reacting to triggers, you're learning how to rewire your nervous systems through connection. Every time you communicate a need calmly and it's met, your system learns that closeness isn't dangerous. Every time your partner opens up and you listen without judgment, they learn that vulnerability won't lead to rejection. This is how you reshape your attachment style from the inside out. Not by reading more books or watching videos alone, but by experiencing secure behavior in real time with a partner who's in it with you. That's why it's so important not to settle for a relationship where you're the only one growing. It may feel noble or even romantic to carry the emotional load by yourself, but it's not sustainable, and it's not healthy. Real love, secure love requires shared effort. Two people both willing to look in the mirror, take responsibility, and choose to show up differently. That's what changes everything. So if you're watching this and realizing that you've been doing all the emotional labor, pause. Ask yourself, is my partner willing to meet me here? Are they capable of growth? And if the answer is yes, you've got something worth working on. But if not, it might be time to stop rowing alone and start walking towards something healthier. You deserve that. Let's bring everything together now with the most important truth. The anxious avoidance cycle is not your destiny, it's a pattern. And patterns can be changed. What you've just explored is more than relationship advice. It's a roadmap toward emotional clarity, personal growth, and ultimately healthier, more secure connections, whether that's with your current partner or with someone in the future. We've talked about what this cycle looks like, how the push-pull of intense affection and sudden withdrawal creates emotional instability that feels confusing and at times addictive. You learn that this dynamic isn't random. It's driven by opposing attachment needs. The anxious partner fears abandonment and seeks closeness to feel safe. The avoidant partner fears engulfment and creates space to feel secure. These two fears lock together, creating the roller coaster that leaves both people feeling misunderstood and alone, even when they care deeply about each other. We looked at where these patterns come from, how early childhood experiences shape your reactions to love, closeness, and vulnerability. And we explored the tools to break free, self-awareness, tracing emotional origins, honest communication, and real behavioral changes. If you're more anxious, that might mean learning to self-soothe, building other relationships for support, and realizing you're okay, even when someone pulls back. If you're more avoidant, that might mean leaning into vulnerability, practicing expression even when it feels uncomfortable or unnatural. The most powerful part of this entire process, you gain back your agency. You stop reacting blindly and start responding with clarity. You get to decide what kind of love you'll participate in. And when two people are both willing to do this work, when they meet each other with honesty, patience, and effort, it's absolutely possible to build something secure, stable, and deeply fulfilling. But even if your partner isn't ready, this journey still matters, because every step you take toward understanding yourself better puts you in a stronger position to create healthy love, either in this relationship or the next. Thank you for being here and for taking the time to reflect on something this deep and personal. I know how much strength it takes to look at your patterns with honesty, and even more to start changing them. You're doing something that matters. If this video gave you insight, clarity, or even just a sense that you're not alone, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. I release weekly content to help you grow, heal, and navigate relationships with emotional maturity and self-respect. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know what resonated most. Are you working through this dynamic now? Are you starting to see your own patterns more clearly? Remember, love doesn't have to feel like chaos. You deserve peace. You deserve consistency. And you absolutely deserve connection that honors your heart, not just activates your wounds. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.